Yeah, like that. Like that. Like this. Like that. Like this. Like that. This is my critique of Fullmetal Alchemist's second chapter, The Price of Life. If you'd like to see the previous video, you can click on the link in the description. Father Cornello doesn't miss a chance to again mock Edward. We learn it's forbidden for alchemists to perform human transmutation. So, a couple of issues. Father Cornello continues to speak with dramatic religious undertones despite being caught as a fraud. An argument might be that he is speaking to Rose, so it's in his benefit to manipulate her how he has done before. Gaslighting, basically. However, he contradicts himself by saying they have committed a sin, but in the previous chapter saying he can accomplish what other alchemists have failed at. I believe this is an unintentional writing flaw, as this inconsistency is never called out throughout the rest of the chapter. He is a lying scumbag, but he hasn't been shown to be incompetent, so it's certainly not to his benefit to contradict himself in front of one of his most faithful. Rose is reminded of Edward's story of the fallen hero, making it perfectly clear what that conversation was about. It then cuts to a flashback of when the Elric brothers attempted their transmutation. I have to say this is presented at a great point. We know this battle isn't over, but Edward defeated the beast, and Father Cornello doesn't currently present an immediate threat, so this is the perfect time to take a break from the action, as it's not interrupting the momentum, as it would if they happened in the middle of the Chimera fight, let's say. Recalling the first page of the first chapter, we have this moment seated in our minds. Tragic irony was always going to be an involved aspect when presented these scenes. However, our understanding of the characters and alchemy have expanded. Using this framework, it's not only that the Elric brothers failed, but that they were doomed to fail. As Edward admitted, many have attempted already for hundreds of years. I don't believe it's a coincidence that Alphonse is the first face we see, as his appearance has been teased throughout the previous chapter, so there is a definite sense of anticipation. It is revealed that the brothers were attempting to resurrect their mother. It's an easily empathetic motive, even if they weren't kids, simply in the idea of bringing back a loved one. We can see the same chalk symbol being drawn. Edward is excited about breakthroughs through his research, researching, and the like. They disregard the laws of alchemy and are overly confident, which perfectly blend together for a disaster. An advantage for using children in a story is that, for most readers, character flaws like ignorance and arrogance are assumed. Of course, this can be misused to have the characters do something stupid for the benefit of progressing the story being told. In this instance, I would judge that it wasn't the case here. Starting with the impetus for their interest in alchemy, resurrecting their mother, which is flawed logic from the beginning. If a person wants to believe something is true, they may try to find evidence that supports this and ignore anything to the contrary, perhaps unintentionally. This is not a flaw unique to children, and we can see that Rose exemplifies this in the last chapter. Another point, the flashback lasts 3 pages, but neither their father, grandparents, or any other adults are seen or spoken about. What we are left with is unsupervised, unfortunate children messing around with something they shouldn't have. I thought it was executed well for how simple of a backstory it was. Just a neat thing to point out. You may notice a familiar suit of armor in the background there. So, to line up events, Alphonse lost his body, Edward loses his leg. Alphonse recounts that by the time he regained consciousness, his brother's arm was missing, which he traded to place Alphonse's soul in the armor. We are presented with a more well-rounded look at Edward's character. The first chapter presented him as mostly, immature, quick-tempered, cynical, dismissive, though he is also capable of showing compassion, even if it's through boorish criticism, as we've seen with his interactions with Rose. This time, however, we get a glimpse of him at his most vulnerable, giving us a strong impression of Edward's courage and desperation. He had just lost a limb, still bleeding out. Despite this, he makes the decision to attempt to bring back his brother. Edward asks Rose if she's ready for the consequences, but she remains silent. For the first time, it's hard for her to come to a quick response like before, which is absolutely an intentional contrast to her behavior in the preceding chapter. The father interjects that Edward's motives for obtaining the Philosopher's Stone are to continue experimenting with resurrection. Edward clarifies that he only intends to use it to regain their original bodies. This exchange is beneficial for us, since we now have an understanding of their end goal, considering the last chapter didn't make it clear what Edward intended to use it for. Another small but important line is that he says he's not sure whether they'll be able to accomplish their new goal. The characterization is strong here, as we can compare the brothers now with them from the flashback, so confident of themselves that they would be able to accomplish something that others haven't after hundreds of years of research. Their failure has changed their perspective. I have been critical of the uses of alchemy in combat previously, but I found this exchange practical, rational, and sometimes clever to the situation at hand. The Philosopher's Stone creates dramatic tension in this battle, as we have limitations for our protagonists, but also it acts as advantages for our villain. Father Cornello isn't bound by the law of equivalent exchange, thus he attempts to get the drop on the brothers by transmuting his cane into a Gatling gun and firing on them. Edward, who does have restrictions, uses the ground to create a wall blocking the gunfire. Alphonse grabs Rose and uses his body as a shield. His actions in this scenario make sense, as if you recall, he requires to draw a chalk symbol to use alchemy, and based on the intricacy of the design, it may take time that he doesn't have in an immediate confrontation. Father Cornello rigged the door so it can't be opened. Minor nitpick. Why have him explain this to the enemy instead of having Edward attempt and fail to open the door? Regardless, Edward transmutes his own door from the wall, escaping into the hallway. Cornello's followers attempt to stop the Elric brothers, Edward showing some resourcefulness again by transmuting his metal arm into a weapon. Here's where I'm at odds with the tone once again, where we're taking some confrontations seriously and others not, just on a whim. They happen to wander by the broadcasting room we've seen earlier. Edward appears to come up with a plan, which involves Edward stealing a bell from a tower. Alright. Interestingly enough, Alphonse says that although Edward did work hard to gain his alchemy talents, a part of what came from it is what he sacrificed. The presumption is that he is referring to his brother's body parts. But the text here is still vague. Rose believes they must have resurrected their mother. While she may show genuine concern here, we can assume that she wants them to have succeeded because it gives her hope for her boyfriend. In the most spine-chilling panel so far, even more so than the one from the first chapter, I'd argue, we see Alphonse holding his brother, looking towards what can only be seen as an arm, hair, and blood at the center of a transmutation circle. Alphonse states that this thing isn't human, classic trope of unknown horror, has the reader participating and filling in those gaps. The scene will obviously affect every person differently, but is simple enough to be a universal concept. Just imagine a failed attempt to revive a loved one, and what's brought back is some terrifying husk of a person. The brothers have sworn off resurrecting humans, but still want their bodies back. But it is reiterated that they realize even that comes with its own risks. We also witness him finish drawing the transmutation circle. He tries to serve their story as a warning to Rose. It's been made very clear how the brothers empathize with her, perhaps even project themselves onto her. I personally did not relate to her decision to side with Cornello after his deception was exposed. Regardless of what the reader makes of her choice, it's far more important that we understand why the characters make their decisions and how they relate to each other. It's not that hard to imagine why the Elric brothers understand her plight. Conceivably, they might have made the same choice. They have all pushed themselves to that point of desperation. Edward tells Cornello to concede, but the father is resistant, He believes that even if Rose were to turn against him, it would not be enough. Edward eggs him on, and Cornello goes on a tirade, basically calling his followers ignorant, disposable idiots. Edward replies with a hearty laughter. He presents a switch and a microphone on the ground. In another example of the brothers' trickery, it is now revealed that Alphonse had transmuted that bell into a microphone, or megaphone. Throughout the last 2 chapters, Arakawa has portrayed these brothers as more than just competent in combat, but can use clever tricks to outwit their enemies. The father, now realizing that their conversation was heard by the town, he attempts to turn his cane into a gun again, but it is sliced by Edward. Cornello, unwilling to admit defeat, attempts to transmute the remaining portion of the gun, however it backfires and fuses with his arm. This catches Edward off guard. In an attempt to inspect the stone, it falls and shatters. This is pretty much the end of the conflict. I would have had some mild criticism, as this is a missed opportunity to see more creative uses from the Philosopher's Stone, but we'll get into that. Both are baffled by this development, Edward appearing comedically disheartened by the experience. Before the father can take advantage of the situation, Edward transmutes a giant sun god Leto statue, slamming its fist into frightening him into unconsciousness. It could be asked why Edward hadn't done this before, but it appears to take quite a while to conjure this thing with a significant degree of concentration, and he only uses this once Cornello is helpless to stop him. Alphonse makes an odd comment about Edward's automail problems, and considering their abilities, it seems weird that this would even be an issue. In this instance, the use of humor would almost work. I mentioned it was a tool for alleviating tension. While by this point, Edward both outwitted and overpowered the father in combat, Cornello no longer presenting a threat, the confrontation's over. I would argue this moment might have a greater impact if it had been the first joke since they entered Cornello's base, because it would have had that surprise factor. But even with that said, we still have to deal with Rose's situation immediately on the same page with no time to breathe. Rose, still in shock, still refuses to accept reality. Edward almost cruelly reminds her that her wish never had a chance. Broken to tears, she is looking for guidance. However, Edward tells her that she's going to have to figure that out for herself. Rose is her own character with her own story and struggles. However, she is also used to cast a reflection of the Elric brothers. It can be presumed based on the details of the flashback and Edward's response here, the brothers didn't have any guidance after the resurrection incident and needed to figure it out for themselves. I want to bring up tone again because I think these events, if rearranged, could work a bit better. Edward defeats Cornello, life-threatening event resolved. Then Rose's scene would be the emotional peak of the story, and then wind that down with tension, with a humorous exchange between the brothers, bringing us back to that more calm, mundane, and sometimes comedic tone of the beginning of this arc. In any case, Arakawa does a good job of giving us a false sense of security and closure because the chapter isn't finished. The citizenry are certainly upset with Father Cornello. As things are falling apart around him, another party is introduced. We can see one of them chewing on one of the Chimera's legs. It is clarified that they were the ones who gave him the false stone with the intentions of disrupting the region. The woman mocks him before stabbing him through the forehead, which comes as a shock. I like the panel work here as they draw attention to her hand before showing these long tendrils. The trail of blood is also a nice touch. The shorter, fatter one begins to eat Father Cornello. So, this is the conclusion to the Leto arc. I should clarify, there aren't any real arcs in Fullmetal Alchemist. This is just what I'm dubbing it as. We get a short and simple backstory. Arakawa has basically planted the end goal for the Elrics, the restoration of their bodies. Blatantly, this is what the series is telling us to be invested in. With Edward's last words to Rose, it can be interpreted that their journey is one of personal redemption and perseverance. The use of alchemy in combat was a marginal improvement here, especially with the opening exchange. The inserts of comedy and dramatic scenes are just as incongruous. thought the final altercation was a bit flat, just having Edward be faster than Cornello and having the Philosopher's Stone be instantly destroyed. However, in regards to that second point, the intervention of the mysterious duo implies that we may see more of the Philosopher's Stone. So I will say the chapter would have had a satisfactory ending with the Elric brothers' departure, yet with the inclusion of these villains, the Philosopher's Stone storyline doesn't just come to an abrupt end, at least for the reader. Father Cornello gets replaced with a far more ruthless and capable antagonist. There is a horror aspect here, with one of them committing cannibalism. Now, any individual's apprehension will vary, but regardless, with the slobbering onomatopoeias and cut to black, I believe it effectively portrayed a disgusting act, which also contrasts with how Edward subdued Cornello. To bring up tragic irony again, Arakawa has created anticipation to see how these forces clash. Nonetheless, the biggest takeaway here should be, what is a state alchemist? We only have 106 chapters left to find out. But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.